A new face in Maplewood. Maplewood, a quaint suburban town where lawns were neatly manicured, street lamps twinkled at dusk, and most residents had lived there for decades, held a sense of timelessness. Streets in Maplewood were lined with homes that told stories of families, traditions, and old-fashioned ideals. Among these families was Mr. William Lark, a retired 68-year-old who took pride in his home and his place in the community. William, a former Marine, had an orderly life and kept a strict routine that suited his disciplined nature. William and his late wife had moved to Maplewood 30 years ago, seeking a peaceful life to raise their only daughter. His wife had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving William with his old house, a cherished garden, and memories that kept him going. Each morning, he'd water the plants his wife had once adored, clip the edges of his lawn with precision, and sit on his porch with a cup of tea, greeting neighbors who passed by with a reserved nod. He believed he knew everyone in Maplewood, or so he thought. One summer afternoon, William noticed a moving truck across the street. The old Benson house, a massive, ivy-covered home, was finally being occupied after years of standing vacant. A slender, elegant woman stepped out of the car, directing the movers as they unloaded furniture, bookshelves, and boxes. Her composure and confidence struck William. She was wearing a neatly tailored blazer, even in the heat, and had an air of sophistication. Her name, as he would later learn, was Maria Thompson. Maria was a 42-year-old attorney, known across the state for her relentless advocacy for social justice and civil rights. She was a partner in a prestigious law firm, a published author, and had represented high-profile cases that often sparked media attention. For Maria, Maplewood was a sanctuary where she could finally enjoy some solitude away from her demanding career. As she stood outside directing the movers, some of the neighbors gathered in small groups on the sidewalks, whispering and glancing at her with curiosity. Few residents had seen someone as distinguished as Maria moving into their quiet neighborhood. To them, she was an outsider, a woman of color, successful, and seemingly unfazed by the subtle glances and hushed conversations. But to William, she was more than an outsider. Her presence stirred something uncomfortable within him, something he couldn't fully comprehend. He found himself peeking through his window, watching her every move. He hadn't spoken to her, nor had he intended to. Maplewood was a quiet, traditional place, and this unexpected new neighbor disrupted that harmony. As the days went by, Maria settled into her new home, oblivious to the silent judgment and scrutiny of the residents around her. She transformed the Benson house into a modern, elegant space that reflected her personality. Each morning, she jogged through the neighborhood, exchanging friendly nods with other early risers. She smiled at children playing in their yards and waved at mail carriers, her confidence radiating warmth. But William watched from a distance, his feelings oscillating between curiosity and unease. One evening, as Maria returned from a late jog, William's unease turned into suspicion. She entered her house, her face flushed from running, and closed the door behind her. William couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He convinced himself that the house felt wrong somehow, though he couldn't pinpoint why. Unable to quiet his suspicions, he picked up the phone and dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? Yes, this is William Lark. I live at 23 Maplewood Drive, and I think I saw someone breaking into the old Benson house, he said, his voice trembling slightly. Well, a woman entered, and she doesn't look like she belongs there. The dispatcher asked for the address, and William, feeling both anxious and resolved, gave Maria's address with a clear voice. Understood, sir. We'll send a patrol car to check it out. Please stay where you are. William hung up, feeling a mixture of guilt and self-righteousness. The Benson house had always stood as a monument of traditional Maplewood values, and he wasn't sure Maria fit that image. He thought to himself, better safe than sorry. Maria, meanwhile, had just sat down with a glass of water, unwinding from her jog. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a notification from her doorbell camera. She dismissed it, assuming it was just a passing car. But a few moments later, there was a loud knock at the door. Surprised, she stood up, wondering who could be there at such an hour. When she opened the door, 2 police officers stood on her porch, their expressions neutral but tense. She instantly sensed the weight of their presence. "Good evening, ma'am. We received a call about a possible break-in at this residence," one of the officers said, his voice professional but firm. "We need to confirm your identity and make sure you have permission to be here." Maria's initial shock was quickly replaced by a sinking feeling in her stomach. She had encountered similar situations throughout her life, and her legal training had prepared her to handle these moments with calm and authority. Taking a deep breath, she looked directly at the officers, her gaze unwavering. "This is my home," she said firmly. "I have lived here for almost 2 weeks now. If you need to see identification, I'll gladly provide it." The officers exchanged a quick glance, their expressions softening slightly. "Thank you, ma'am. We just need to verify," one of them said, his tone more respectful than before. Maria retrieved her wallet and handed over her driver's license, watching as the officers examined it. After a few moments, they nodded, handing it back. "We apologize for the inconvenience, Miss Thompson. We received a call from a concerned neighbor." Maria smiled politely, though her frustration simmered beneath the surface. She thanked them for their professionalism, and they left, wishing her a good evening. As they walked away, she felt a blend of relief and exhaustion, realizing that her peaceful sanctuary wasn't as shielded from prejudice as she had hoped. Across the street, William watched the scene from his window, feeling a pang of guilt. A small part of him wondered if he had overstepped, but his uncertainty was quickly overtaken by an ingrained sense of caution. He convinced himself that he had acted out of concern for the neighborhood's safety. That night, Maria lay awake, reflecting on the encounter. Her experience as a lawyer had taught her to navigate prejudice, but it was moments like these that reminded her of the personal toll it took. She resolved to face the community's discomfort head-on, with the same dignity and resilience she had shown in courtrooms across the country. The next morning, Maria stepped out of her house with a purpose. She walked over to William's door, took a deep breath, and knocked, determined to address the issue directly. William, taken aback, hesitated before opening the door, his eyes widening as he saw Maria standing there, her posture confident yet open. "Good morning, Mr. Lark." She greeted him with a polite smile. "I'm Maria Thompson, your new neighbor. I thought it was about time we met." The knock on the door. William stood in his doorway, facing Maria with a look of shock mixed with the remnants of his lingering apprehension. He hadn't expected her to come over, and certainly not with such poise and composure. Part of him hoped she would just brush off last night's incident. Instead, here she was, standing on his doorstep, her eyes steady and searching. "Good morning, Mr. Lark," Maria greeted, her voice calm but firm. "I'm Maria Thompson. I thought it was about time we officially met, especially after last night." William shifted uncomfortably. He cleared his throat, struggling to find the right words. "Yes, good morning. I apologize if there was some sort of misunderstanding," he mumbled, his voice a touch defensive as he folded his arms across his chest. Maria remained unfazed. "I think it's more than a misunderstanding," she replied gently. "It's not every day someone calls the police on their neighbor for walking into their own home." Her words were polite, but they landed with a force William couldn't ignore. He glanced down at his porch, avoiding her gaze. "I wasn't sure," he stammered. I didn't know who you were or if you were supposed to be there." Maria's brow lifted slightly. "I understand, Mr. Lark. You've lived here a long time, and this is your community. But I'm a part of this neighborhood now, too. I just want the same respect and peace you'd extend to anyone else." The way she spoke, the quiet confidence, the deliberate clarity, struck a chord with William. He felt a pang of embarrassment, but struggled to articulate his discomfort. His heart and mind wrestled. He wanted to justify his actions, but he knew they came from a place he wasn't entirely proud of. "It's not personal," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, you're different from the folks here. It's hard to get used to change, especially at my age." Mariah didn't flinch. Instead, she took a step forward, her expression softening just slightly. "I understand, Mr. Lark, and I know that change can be uncomfortable. But I'm here because I want to be a part of this community too. I worked very hard to build a life that allowed me to move to a place like Maplewood. I'd hoped this would be a peaceful sanctuary for me." William's defensive posture slackened as her words sank in. The determination in her voice, mixed with a hint of vulnerability, tugged at something deep within him. He glanced at her again, seeing the strength in her eyes, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of remorse. After a moment, he cleared his throat and took a step back, gesturing toward his living room. "Would you like to come in? I just made tea. Margaret, my late wife, she always said it helps clear the air." Maria hesitated briefly before nodding, a small, understanding smile crossing her lips. "Tea sounds lovely. Thank you." She stepped inside, and William closed the door behind her, still trying to process his own conflicting emotions. He led her to the living room, where the walls were adorned with photos of his family, awards from his military service, and a few landscapes painted by his late wife. The room felt warm, even nostalgic, a reflection of a life meticulously crafted and preserved. As Maria took a seat on the floral-patterned sofa, William busied himself in the kitchen, pouring tea into delicate china cups that hadn't been used in years. The cups clinked slightly in his hands, betraying his nerves. Finally, he returned to the living room, handing her a cup before settling into his favorite armchair across from her. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping their tea, each waiting for the other to speak. It was Maria who finally broke the silence. "I've read a lot about people like you, Mr. Lark," she said, her tone thoughtful. "People who've dedicated their lives to their country, who carry a deep sense of tradition and community pride. You probably fought hard to make this neighborhood what it is." He looked at her, somewhat surprised by her observation. "I did, yes. I've seen a lot in my day, and I've always tried to protect what I hold dear." "I can respect that," Mariah replied, nodding. "And in my own way, I've done something similar. I've fought for fairness and justice, for people who haven't had the chance to build the kind of life they deserve." William shifted uncomfortably. He knew she was a lawyer, but the way she spoke now hinted at a much larger mission. It was as if every word she chose was an invitation for him to understand a world he'd never fully considered. "So you help people," he said slowly, realizing how reductive it sounded. "I mean, you're not just a lawyer." She chuckled softly, and the tension in the room eased slightly. "Well, I am a lawyer, yes. But my work often involves cases that go beyond the law. They touch on issues that make people uncomfortable, that force people to see things they'd rather not acknowledge. It's not always easy, but it's necessary." Her words lingered, and William found himself questioning his own assumptions. The world Mariah described was foreign to him, yet it resonated in a way he hadn't anticipated. He thought of his own battles, his own struggles to uphold values he believed were right. Perhaps, he realized, Maria's fight wasn't so different from his own. "What made you choose Maplewood?" he asked, finally daring to voice the question that had gnawed at him since she arrived. She took a sip of her tea before answering, her gaze drifting to the family photos on his wall. "I needed a place where I could feel grounded, somewhere peaceful. After years of dealing with stressful cases, I wanted a neighborhood that felt stable, like a community I could finally belong to. Maplewood seemed like that place." William's eyes softened as he listened. In that moment, he felt the smallest crack forming in the wall he built around himself. He'd always viewed Maplewood as a sanctuary from the changes happening outside, a place untouched by the world's turmoil. But hearing Mariah's story, he began to understand that his sanctuary didn't have to be so narrowly defined. "You know," he began slowly, choosing his words carefully, I think I've been so focused on keeping things the way they were that I didn't stop to consider that maybe, just maybe, what I was protecting wasn't Maplewood, but my own comfort. Maria looked at him, her gaze steady but gentle. Change isn't easy, Mr. Lark. But sometimes, letting go of that comfort can open the door to something better. The weight of her words settled over him, and he felt a strange sense of relief, as if a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying was beginning to lift. He looked at her, a newfound respect glimmering in his eyes. Maybe you're right, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe I need to learn to share this place, even if it feels strange at first. They sat together in a comfortable silence, sipping their tea as the morning sun cast soft beams through the lace curtains. In that quiet moment, William felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of connection, a willingness to open his heart just a little, to make room for the unexpected. As Maria finished her tea, she set her cup down and looked at him, her expression thoughtful. Thank you, Mr. Lark, for inviting me in. It means more than you might realize. William nodded, his lips forming a faint smile. Thank you, Miss Thompson. Maria. Maybe we can try being neighbors, real neighbors, from now on. With a gentle nod, Maria rose to leave, but not before reaching out her hand. William took it, his handshake firm but sincere, a silent promise of new beginnings. As he watched her cross the street back to her house, he felt a quiet pride, not for the Maplewood he protected all these years, but for the Maplewood that could be, a place where new stories and friendships could grow. And for the first time, he felt hopeful, not just for himself, but for the future of the neighborhood he loved. Ripples of change in Maplewood. William sat on his porch the next morning, the familiar scent of fresh-cut grass in the air as he carefully trimmed the edges of his lawn. But unlike other mornings, his mind wasn't solely on his garden. His thoughts lingered on his conversation with Maria, replaying her words and the way they'd unsettled him, though in a good way. She had given him a glimpse into a world he'd resisted, one where Maplewood could be both familiar and new. As he continued trimming, a voice interrupted his thoughts. Morning, William. Looks like you're up and at it already. It was his longtime neighbor, Hank Saunders, a retiree who lived 2 houses down. Hank, like William, had lived in Maplewood for decades and often shared William's cautious approach to newcomers. They'd spent countless evenings discussing the neighborhood, reminiscing about the old days, and speculating about the future. Morning, Hank, William replied, his tone distracted. Hank noticed the hesitation in his friend's voice and cocked his head, studying him curiously. Something on your mind, Will? William shrugged, unsure how to start. Well, it's just the new neighbor across the street, Maria Thompson. We finally had a proper conversation yesterday. Hank raised an eyebrow. Oh, you mean the lawyer woman? What about her? She's different, William said, trying to find the right words, but not in the way I expected. She's smart, thoughtful. She wants to be part of the community, not change it. Hank chuckled, a bit dismissively. Yeah, well, they all say that at first, don't they? Until they start wanting to improve things around here. William shook his head, surprised by his own urge to defend Maria. I don't think that's what she wants, Hank. She moved here for the peace, the same reason we all did. She's got her reasons, and I think they're genuine. Hank looked at him with a hint of surprise, not used to hearing William speak with such conviction about anyone new. Sounds like she's got you under her spell, Will. Maybe, William admitted, smiling slightly. Or maybe I'm just seeing things differently now. Talking to her made me realize. Maybe we've been holding on to Maplewood a little too tightly. Hank scoffed. You're starting to sound like those folks in the city, always going on about change and progress. This place was built on tradition. Will, we start letting people come in and do as they please, and Maplewood won't be Maplewood anymore. William sighed, sensing the wall Hank had built around himself, the same wall he'd once held so firmly. He knew pushing the matter wouldn't help, so he simply nodded and returned to his gardening, leaving Hank to his views. But as Hank walked away, William couldn't help but wonder if his friend's resistance mirrored his own fears. Fears he was slowly learning to let go of. Later that week, William noticed Mariah hosting a small gathering in her backyard. A handful of friends from out of town had come to visit, and laughter floated over the fence, mingling with the evening breeze. Mariah's guests were a lively mix of people, dressed in bright colors, their voices filled with warmth and humor. They spoke with passion about their work, their travels, and their families, their energy contrasting with the usual quiet of Maplewood. Some of the other residents watched from their windows, curious and somewhat wary of the unfamiliar sounds. William felt a twinge of unease, aware of the stares and murmurs. He knew Maplewood residents prided themselves on their peaceful, predictable environment. Maria's gathering, with its energy and diversity, was a stark contrast to the subdued gatherings Maplewood was used to. But as he listened to their conversations, he found himself smiling at the genuine joy and camaraderie among Mariah and her friends. The following morning, as William stepped out to retrieve his newspaper, he noticed one of his neighbors, Mrs. Porter, walking her dog along the sidewalk. She was a petite woman in her 70s, known for her love of order and routine. She spotted William and approached, her brow furrowed with concern. "William," she began, her voice tinged with disapproval, "did you hear all that noise coming from the Benson house last night? It went on for hours. I could hardly get any sleep." He glanced at her, noting the irritation in her eyes. "Yes, I heard. Mariah had a few friends over. They seemed to be having a nice time." Mrs. Porter sniffed, clearly unimpressed. "It's just not the kind of behavior we're used to in Maplewood, wouldn't you agree? This neighborhood has always been so peaceful." William paused, realizing he was at a crossroads. Part of him wanted to agree, to fall back into the comfort of familiar complaints. But another part of him, the part Mariah had awakened, wanted to challenge the notion that peaceful meant excluding others. "Well, maybe a little laughter and joy now, and then isn't so bad, Ruth," he said, surprising even himself. "Maplewood has room for all kinds of people. Maria and her friends weren't causing any harm." Mrs. Porter's lips pressed into a thin line, her surprise evident. "I suppose," she said grudgingly. "But if this becomes a regular occurrence, I think we need to have a word with the neighborhood association." With that, she walked off, her dog trotting at her heels. William watched her go, feeling both proud and unsettled. He'd taken a small stand, but he knew there were others in the neighborhood who shared Mrs. Porter's concerns. Change was never easy, and Maplewood was no exception. Over the next few days, William noticed subtle shifts around him. Mariah continued to greet her neighbors with a warm smile, unbothered by their wary glances. She joined the community meetings, offering thoughtful insights that were both considerate and grounded. Despite the initial skepticism, her contributions were well received, and slowly some of the residents began warming up to her, but not everyone was on board. Hank, for one, remained resistant, frequently voicing his displeasure over coffee with William. "She's trying too hard," he grumbled one morning. "Making friends, joining meetings, feels like she's got an agenda." William raised an eyebrow. "Or maybe she's just trying to be part of the neighborhood, Hank. Isn't that what we wanted?" Hank shook his head, unyielding. "Not like this. Maplewood's always had a way of doing things. New folks come in and adapt, not the other way around." William sat in silence, realizing how different his perspective had become. He remembered the pride he once felt in Maplewood's traditions, but now he couldn't help but see how that pride had sometimes stifled change and prevented growth. As the summer days passed, William continued to observe Mariah's quiet resilience and warmth. She organized a charity event to support local shelters, inviting the entire neighborhood to participate. Though some residents were skeptical at first, her efforts eventually won over even the most reluctant attendees. Mariah had a way of bridging gaps, of drawing people in without forcing them to abandon their values. One evening after the charity event, William found himself standing beside Mariah as she cleaned up the folding tables and packed away leftover food. The event had been a success, and the sense of community lingered in the air. "Thank you for inviting us all tonight," William said, his voice sincere. "You've done more for this neighborhood than most folks who've lived here their whole lives." Mariah smiled, wiping her hands on a napkin. "Thank you, William. I just wanted to share a bit of myself with Maplewood and maybe bring us all a little closer together." William nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude and admiration. He looked around, seeing his neighbors smiling and chatting, a newfound warmth in their interactions. Mariah had managed to soften the edges of Maplewood's rigid traditions, creating a space for both old and new. As the evening wound down, William caught Hank watching from the sidelines, his expression unreadable. He knew Hank wasn't ready to embrace change, but perhaps with time, even Hank would come to see that Maplewood's strength lay not in its resistance to change, but in its ability to grow while holding on to what truly mattered. For the first time in years, William felt a sense of hope, not just for himself, but for the neighborhood he cherished. He'd begun to understand that his role wasn't just to protect Maplewood, but to help it evolve, to make room for voices like Mariah's. Voices that could breathe new life into a place that had, in some ways, grown stagnant. And as he walked home that night, a warm glow settled in his heart. The Maplewood he loved was still there, but it was growing, transforming into something even better, something he was proud to be a part of. Breaking barriers and building bridges. William stood in his kitchen, staring absently out the window toward Mariah's house. Over the past few weeks, he had come to admire her resilience and openness. Her quiet strength reminded him of his wife, Margaret, who had been both a calming presence and an unwavering advocate for others in her own way. With each passing day, William found himself increasingly grateful for the perspective Mariah had brought into his life. One brisk Saturday morning, William decided to take a walk through Maplewood. He wanted to see the town from a fresh perspective, one inspired by Mariah's outlook. As he wandered down familiar streets, he noticed things he had taken for granted. The laughter of children playing, the soft murmurs of elderly couples walking hand in hand, the vibrant flowers blooming in every yard. Everything felt more alive, more interconnected. Lost in thought, he almost didn't notice Hank approaching from the opposite side of the street. "Hey there, Will," Hank called out, his tone uncharacteristically flat. "Out for a morning stroll?" William nodded, a polite smile on his face. "Just taking in the neighborhood." Hank scoffed, looking away as if gathering his thoughts. "I ran into Mariah this morning," he said, his voice tinged with reluctance. "She was running some charity thing at the community center. Asked if I wanted to help out." William perked up. "And did you?" Hank shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Well, I didn't want to be rude. Figured I could at least stop by and see what it was all about." William smiled to himself, realizing that Mariah's kindness had begun to chip away at Hank's resistance. "I think that's great, Hank. She's been working hard to bring the community together." Hank's face softened, his gaze fixed on the ground. "You know, Will, maybe I was wrong about her. She's different, but in a good way. Maybe I've been too stubborn." Encouraged by Hank's words, William clapped him on the shoulder. "Sometimes it takes a fresh perspective to remind us what truly matters. I think Mariah is helping us all see that." They walked in companionable silence for a few moments before parting ways, William's heart lighter than it had been in years. Later that day, as William was tending to his garden, he noticed Mariah across the street, unloading a stack of boxes from her car. She looked up and waved, a friendly smile on her face. "Need a hand?" William called, making his way over. Maria laughed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That would be wonderful, thank you. I didn't realize how many supplies I'd need for the community event." They carried the boxes into her garage, their conversation flowing easily. William felt a warmth in Mariah's presence, a genuine kindness that seemed to bring out the best in people. "William, I've been meaning to ask," Mariah said, pausing as they set down the last box. "Would you consider joining me as a co-host for the event? It's a neighborhood cleanup and food drive. I think your presence would mean a lot to the community." William's eyes widened. The idea of co-hosting anything was daunting, but he couldn't deny the tug of excitement in his chest. It felt like an opportunity to give back, to show Maplewood that he too was ready to embrace change. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "I'd be honored, Mariah. Let's make it a day to remember." As the day of the event approached, Maplewood buzzed with anticipation. Mariah had spared no effort in organizing the cleanup, coordinating everything from volunteers to refreshments, with William lending a hand wherever he could. The event was more than a simple cleanup. It was a celebration of Maplewood's unity and resilience. The morning of the event dawned bright and clear. Neighbors gathered at the community park, wearing matching T-shirts Mariah had designed, emblazoned with the words, "Maplewood Strong." There was a sense of camaraderie in the air, a renewed pride in their shared home. William looked around, marveling at the turnout. He saw Hank, who had not only volunteered but brought his wife along. Even Mrs. Porter, who had initially been wary of Mariah, was there with a plate of homemade cookies to share with the crowd. As the cleanup began, people laughed, chatted, and worked side by side. Mariah moved through the crowd with grace, offering encouragement and thanks to everyone she passed. William watched her, feeling a swell of admiration for the way she had managed to bring everyone together. During a break, Mariah took to the small stage they had set up in the park, her voice amplified over the speakers. "I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today," she began, her tone warm and heartfelt. "This community has welcomed me with open arms, and I'm grateful for the chance to give back. Maplewood isn't just a place to live, it's a place to belong. Together, we're making it stronger, one act of kindness at a time." The crowd erupted in applause, and William found himself clapping harder than anyone. In that moment, he felt an immense pride in his neighborhood and in himself for embracing the changes that had once seemed so foreign. But as the event continued, a commotion erupted near the park entrance. A group of teenagers, unfamiliar to most of the residents, had wandered into the park, their loud voices and rowdy behavior unsettling some of the attendees. They wore clothes with edgy designs, and their presence stood in stark contrast to Maplewood's usual quiet and orderly atmosphere. Some residents began murmuring, exchanging worried glances. A few of the teenagers pulled out skateboards and began riding around the park, drawing disapproving looks from several of the older attendees. Mrs. Porter frowned, her posture tense, as she whispered to a friend, "Who let them in here? They're disrupting everything." Mariah, noticing the tension, walked calmly toward the group, her expression friendly and open. William watched, holding his breath as she approached them. "Hi there." Mariah greeted them with a warm smile. "We're having a community event today, the cleanup and food drive. Would you like to join us? We'd love to have you." The teenagers exchanged uncertain glances, clearly taken aback by her welcoming tone. One of them, a tall boy with dark hair and a pierced eyebrow, looked around awkwardly before nodding. Yeah, sure. We didn't mean to mess things up. Just looking for somewhere to hang out." Maria's smile widened. "You're not messing anything up. We're glad you're here. Feel free to help out if you want. We could use all the hands we can get." Slowly, the teenagers joined the cleanup, their initial hesitation melting away as they worked alongside the other residents. Their loud banter gradually turned into friendly chatter, and William noticed some of the older neighbors, including Mrs. Porter, beginning to warm up to them. Soon, laughter echoed across the park as the teenagers shared stories with the residents, their energy blending seamlessly with the community. As the event wound down, William and Mariah stood side by side, watching the teenagers interact with the residents. He looked at Mariah, a newfound respect shining in his eyes. "You have a way of seeing the good in everyone," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "I wouldn't have thought to invite them to join us. I'd have probably chased them off." Mariah shrugged, her gaze fixed on the crowd. "Everyone deserves a place where they feel welcome, William. Sometimes, all it takes is someone to reach out first." He nodded, her words resonating deeply. The event had gone beyond just cleaning the park. It had brought people together in a way Maplewood hadn't seen in years. It was a moment that celebrated unity over division, inclusion over exclusion. As the last of the attendees left, William stayed behind to help Mariah clean up. Together, they packed away tables and folded chairs, their movements quiet and companionable. When the last table was stowed, they stood together, looking out over the now pristine park, a tangible symbol of their shared efforts. "Thank you, Mariah," William said softly, his voice filled with gratitude. "You've shown me what Maplewood could be, what it should be." Mariah turned to him, her eyes shining with a quiet joy. "Thank you, William. I couldn't have done this without you." They stood there in comfortable silence, both feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. For William, the experience had been transformative, breaking down walls he'd built around his heart. And for Maria, it was a moment of belonging, a confirmation that she had finally found a place to call home. As they walked back to their homes, side by side, William knew that Maplewood had changed forever. And for the first time, he realized it was a change he welcomed wholeheartedly. A community tested. The glow from the successful neighborhood event lingered in Maplewood over the following weeks. Neighbors were friendlier, conversations flowed more easily, and Mariah's influence had softened many hearts, even those that had once been wary. For William, each day felt like an opportunity to see his neighborhood anew, with Mariah's friendship acting as a bridge between the past he had cherished and the future he now embraced. But as with any community, true unity was about to be tested. One crisp autumn morning, Maplewood residents awoke to an unsettling sight. In the early hours, someone had spray-painted graffiti on the side of Mariah's house. The vibrant red letters sprawled across her white siding, an ugly, jarring message. "Note ULCON." William's heart sank as he walked past her house, taking in the harsh words. He clenched his fists, anger and disappointment boiling within him. The neighborhood he had defended for so long, the same neighborhood that he thought had grown beyond such prejudice, had betrayed him, and, more painfully, it had betrayed Mariah. As he stood there, stunned, Mariah came out onto her porch, her expression calm but pained. She noticed William and gave him a slight nod, her eyes betraying a trace of sadness. "Morning, William," she said softly, folding her arms as she surveyed the damage. "Seems someone decided to leave a message." He shook his head, struggling to contain his frustration. "Mariah, I am so sorry. I thought Maplewood was better than this." She gave him a faint smile, her voice calm. "It's all right, William. This isn't the first time I've faced something like this, and unfortunately, it may not be the last. But it's still my home, and I'm not going anywhere." Her resilience only deepened his admiration for her, but it also strengthened his resolve to take action. "We're going to fix this, Mariah. I'll gather some neighbors, and we'll repaint it today. No one should feel unwelcome in Maplewood." She nodded, her expression grateful. "Thank you, William. I appreciate it." William immediately set off down the street, knocking on doors and explaining the situation to each resident. Hank was the first to agree, his usual gruffness replaced by a fierce determination. "Whoever did this doesn't represent us," Hank said firmly. "Let's show them that we stand with Mariah." One by one, neighbors joined in, each expressing disbelief and anger over the graffiti. Even Mrs. Porter, who had been skeptical of Mariah's presence, looked genuinely appalled. "This is disgraceful," she muttered, shaking her head. "No one deserves this." By mid-morning, a group of neighbors had gathered at Mariah's house, armed with paint, brushes, and rollers. William stood at the forefront, giving instructions and organizing the effort. Maria watched from her porch, a soft smile on her face, as she saw Maplewood's true spirit come alive. As the neighbors worked together, conversations bubbled up, sharing memories, jokes, and even heartfelt confessions. Some of the teenagers from the park cleanup had shown up, eager to help after hearing about what had happened. Their energy brought a lightness to the task, and soon the red letters disappeared, replaced by a smooth, fresh coat of white paint. By noon, the graffiti was gone, but the group decided to go a step further. The teenagers, led by the boy with the pierced eyebrow, suggested painting a mural on Mariah's garage door, a symbol of unity, something positive to counteract the hateful message. With Mariah's permission, they began sketching out a design, depicting hands of different colors reaching toward a common goal. The mural grew slowly, each person contributing their own touch. Some added small flowers, others drew symbols of peace, and together, it became a powerful representation of what Maplewood now stood for. Throughout the day, Maria moved among the volunteers, offering snacks and water, her gratitude evident in her every gesture. At one point, William caught her eye, and they exchanged a smile, a silent acknowledgement of the change they had helped inspire in Maplewood. When the mural was finally finished, the neighbors stood back, admiring their work. The once stark white garage door was now a colorful testament to the strength of their community. It was a bold, beautiful symbol that Maplewood had not only survived its test of unity, but had emerged stronger and more inclusive. As they admired their work, one of the teenagers raised his phone, snapping a picture of the mural and posting it on social media. Within minutes, the post had garnered dozens of comments from other residents, sharing their pride and support. By evening, the word had spread beyond Maplewood, and news of the mural reached the local media. A reporter arrived to interview Mariah, curious about her story and the community's response. Mariah spoke with quiet dignity, sharing her gratitude for the neighbors who had rallied around her. "This mural represents the heart of Maplewood," she said to the reporter, her voice filled with warmth. "It's a reminder that we're stronger together and that everyone deserves a place where they feel valued and respected." Her words resonated deeply with everyone present, especially William. He realized that Maria's strength had not only transformed the way he viewed his own beliefs, but had also inspired the entire community to confront its values. Maplewood had changed, and he couldn't have been prouder. The next morning, as William walked past Mariah's house, he noticed that several people had left small bouquets of flowers and notes of encouragement by the mural. The sight touched him deeply, a tangible reminder of the love and resilience that had blossomed within Maplewood. But the journey wasn't over. William knew there would still be challenges, moments when prejudice and resistance would rear their heads. Yet he felt ready for them, more determined than ever to stand beside Mariah and anyone else who sought to make Maplewood a place of acceptance. A few days later, the town council held a meeting to address the incident, and Mariah was invited to speak. William and several other neighbors attended, filling the council chambers to show their support. As Maria took the podium, her voice steady and calm, William felt a surge of pride. "I moved to Maplewood because I believed in the spirit of this community," Mariah began, her gaze sweeping across the room. "And despite recent events, that belief has only grown stronger. What happened last week was painful, but it brought us closer, and it reminded us of the importance of unity. I'm grateful to be part of a community that stands together, and I hope Maplewood will continue to be a place where everyone feels they belong." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. William, standing beside Hank and Mrs. Porter, clapped harder than anyone, his eyes misty with emotion. The town council unanimously condemned the act of vandalism, promising to increase efforts to make Maplewood a welcoming place for all. As they left the meeting, Hank turned to William, a rare look of emotion on his usually stoic face. "I never thought I'd see the day when this town could change so much," he admitted, his voice gruff. "Guess we owe a lot to Mariah. And maybe to you too, Will." William chuckled, clapping Hank on the shoulder. "Change isn't so bad, is it?" Hank grinned. "No, not at all. Guess it's time we let go of a few old ideas. In the following weeks, Maplewood flourished with a newfound sense of openness. People greeted each other more warmly, conversations flowed more easily, and Mariah's mural became a beloved symbol of the community's resilience. William found himself spending more time with Mariah, their friendship deepening as they continued to build a neighborhood they both believed in. On one particularly crisp autumn afternoon, as William sat on his porch sipping tea, Maria joined him, a quiet smile on her face. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said, gazing out at the neighborhood. William nodded, a deep sense of satisfaction filling him. "Yes, we have. And I couldn't be prouder." They sat together in comfortable silence, the sun casting a warm glow over Maplewood. In that moment, William realized he had found not only a friend in Mariah, but also a sense of peace he hadn't known he was missing. Maplewood was still his home, but now it was something even better, a place where every voice mattered, and every heart was welcome. The legacy of Maplewood. The brisk winter air settled over Maplewood as December arrived, blanketing the town in a serene, quiet cold. Snow dusted the rooftops and coated the trees, transforming the neighborhood into a picturesque scene. In the stillness, Maplewood seemed timeless, yet William knew that beneath its traditional exterior, the heart of the community had changed profoundly. William was on his porch, bundled in his thick wool coat, gazing at Mariah's house across the street. A soft glow from the Christmas lights illuminated her front porch, casting a gentle warmth over the snowy yard. The mural on her garage door had become a beloved part of the neighborhood, with residents often pausing to admire its message of unity and resilience. This winter, it felt like an emblem not just of hope, but of progress, a reminder that Maplewood had chosen to move forward together. Just as he was contemplating this, Maria stepped outside, waving at him with a smile. "Good morning, William," she called, her voice cheerful. "Are you ready for the community potluck tonight?" He chuckled, nodding. "I think I'm as ready as I'll ever be. I made Margaret's famous apple pie. She always swore it could bring people together." Maria laughed, walking over to his porch. "Well, then I'm excited to try it. Seems fitting for the season, doesn't it? A time of togetherness." The annual community potluck was a cherished tradition in Maplewood, bringing families, neighbors, and friends together to share food and stories. But this year felt special, and William knew why. It was the first time they'd held the potluck since the events of autumn. The graffiti, the mural, the community's rallying cry. This gathering would be a testament to how far they'd come, and everyone in town seemed to feel it. As evening approached, William dressed in his best sweater, packed up his pie, and made his way to the town hall. The large room was already bustling with laughter and conversation. Families had decorated tables with festive garlands, and every corner of the hall seemed to sparkle with fairy lights. The smell of roasted turkey, savory casseroles, and fresh-baked bread filled the air, blending with the sound of holiday carols playing softly in the background. William spotted Maria helping to arrange tables, her laughter brightening the room. As she moved through the crowd, greeting everyone with warmth, William couldn't help but marvel at the impact she had made on Maplewood. She had brought with her a quiet strength and a genuine desire to belong that had bridged gaps William once thought were insurmountable. As he approached her, she turned to him, her eyes sparkling with gratitude. "William, I'm so glad you made it. I hope you're ready to share that famous pie recipe with everyone," she teased. "Only if you promise to give me a taste of whatever delicious dish you brought," he replied with a grin. They spent the next few hours mingling with friends and neighbors, sharing stories and memories. William noticed Hank in a corner, laughing heartily with Mrs. Porter over a story about their younger days. Even the teenagers who had helped with the mural had come, bringing their own contributions to the potluck. Plates of cookies and brownies decorated with colorful holiday sprinkles. As the night wore on, Maria stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room. The chatter quieted, and all eyes turned to her as she raised a glass in a heartfelt toast. "I just want to say thank you," she began, her voice warm and filled with emotion. "When I moved to Maplewood, I was looking for a home, a place where I could find peace and belonging. And I can truly say that I found that here, with all of you." She paused, glancing around the room, her gaze lingering on William, Hank, and Mrs. Porter. "This year, we faced challenges that could have divided us, but instead, they brought us closer. We've shown that Maplewood isn't just a place on a map. It's a community of people who care about each other, who choose kindness over division. I am honored to be a part of this family." Everyone raised their glasses, and a chorus of voices echoed through the hall. "To Maplewood." After the toast, William found himself seated next to Mariah at one of the long tables, the warmth of the room cocooning them from the cold outside. They shared stories of holiday memories, with William telling tales of his late wife, Margaret's love for Christmas, and how she'd insisted on decorating the house from top to bottom every year. "Margaret sounds like she was a wonderful person," Mariah said softly, her voice filled with understanding. "I think she'd be proud of the man you are, William." Her words struck a chord deep within him, and he felt a wave of gratitude. For so long, he had clung to the past, to a version of Maplewood he thought he needed to protect. But Mariah had shown him that change didn't mean losing what he loved. It meant growing with it, embracing a future that could be even better than the past. As the evening began to wind down, people started gathering their coats, bidding each other good night, and heading home through the snowy streets. William walked Mariah to her door, the chill of the night air sharp but refreshing. "Thank you for everything, Mariah," he said, his voice steady but heartfelt. "You've brought something to Maplewood I didn't realize we needed, and you've helped me see things I never would have seen on my own." Maria placed a gentle hand on his arm. "And thank you, William. Without you, none of this would have been possible. You gave Maplewood the courage to open its heart." As they stood there in the soft glow of her porch lights, a sense of peace settled between them. Maria was more than just a neighbor. She had become family, and Maplewood was as much her home as it was William's. That winter, the mural on Mariah's garage remained as vibrant as ever, a testament to the resilience and unity that had blossomed at Maplewood. And as the new year dawned, it became clear that the changes Mariah had inspired would be lasting ones. People greeted each other more openly, conversations were kinder and more inclusive, and the spirit of unity had become woven into the fabric of the town. One crisp January morning, William walked past Mariah's house and noticed something new. She had hung a small plaque beside her front door. Curiosity piqued, he walked closer to read it. The plaque held a simple inscription, "Welcome home." A smile spread across his face as he realized the depth of those words. Mariah had brought more than just a mural and a new perspective. She had brought a renewed sense of belonging to everyone in Maplewood. As William returned to his porch, he looked out over his neighborhood, his heart full of pride and gratitude. Maplewood was still the same town he'd always loved, but now it was a place where every voice mattered, where every heart was welcome, and where the past and future walked hand in hand. And with Mariah as his neighbor, William knew that Maplewood's best days were still to come.